And he says, you know, when he writes about love in the Turkish capital, and they review the book in London, they would say, oh, he writes most beautifully about Turkish love. When, let's say, the Anglo-Saxon Ian McEwan writes about love, they say, oh, he writes most beautifully about love. So that's always the danger of being in a, let's say, a minority language and being introduced not as a novelist, but as an Afrikaans novelist. So this consciousness is important. It's a wonderful position to be in, because it's a marginalized position. And I think mainstream is never interesting. The margin is interesting. The tensions between the margin and the center is fascinating. And there's a lot of energy there. And there's a nice other term I like to think about, and it's the term glossality. The global and the local. Glossality, locality and global. And that means this, the energies between the local and the global. So I think Afrikaans authors are very conscious of the fact that they write in a minority language, and that then they have to move out into a wider cultural discourse in our country, which is more and more in English. And you have a young generation of writers in Afrikaans who have to decide, am I going to stay writing in Afrikaans? By the way, Afrikaans books are better than English novels in South Africa, so there's an audience still, but they have to make this decision. And someone like Antjie Krog has said that you've got to do it in English as well, obviously, because she does it in Afrikaans most wonderfully, to become part of the discourse. And that is true, but the strength then is the local and the global. So it's a complex position, and we are also, I'm in the field of literature, and we are very conscious of canonization and so on, the process by which literature is seen as good in certain texts. And so now the Cambridge Guide to South African Literature comes out. We are always very critical, and we look and we say, the weight of Afrikaans writing has been ignored. And so there's always these tensions which are there. But it's fantastic for me to have the tongue of Michiel and Leon, and they take me out into a world where I feel challenged anew, because I am from the Afrikaans world, and it's fantastic to meet readers who will read me in English. They will not meet me in the They won't meet me in the flesh, in a sense, but they'll meet me in a different flesh. And that's an interesting, very creative position to be in. Does that explain?
That's good, that's good. I mean, on the matter of, I would disagree with Antjie Krog if that were her position, that one should write in English, because I once wrote an article called Making It Onto the A-List, and that article was about books that get republished. So we get a lot of books published. Let's say that last year in South Africa, 40 English-speaking novels were published. I know because I happen to be on a judging panel and there are 40 of them to read. And of those 40 novels, I estimate that 36 of them will kind of disappear without a trace. And that's just the hard fact of the matter. And the other hard fact of the matter is that those 40 published novels represent about 1%, according to publishers I've spoken to, of manuscripts they receive, which is gives you about 4,000 manuscripts they receive. 40 are published, and about 4 won't disappear into the pitch dark of a mine shaft. And one of the marks of making the A-list, making a mark beyond that initial publication is republication. So A.C. Jordan's Tales of Southern Africa, 100 years after it was first published, gets republished in a new edition. And that's a kind of canonicity, an organic canonicity, but a similar kind is from Afrikaans to translation into English. Only the best Afrikaans novels get translated.
But you know, Leon, the world is changing, and it's changing fast, as we know. Many years ago, Albie Sachs said to me, Etienne, only Ace Krieger could make it in the English world, and maybe Leipold a little bit. And then, of course, you refer to Brink as well, of Afrikaans writers. But things have opened up, and borders have become much more soft and relaxed. And I would also hope that English fiction, written in this country, would also be published in Afrikaans. And we haven't then even touched on the immense problem of the other indigenous languages and the literatures in those languages, which is one of the great silences in our country and the great shames of our country, and of the government's way of thinking when it comes to funding and thinking about language in this country.
There's a big power imbalance in the translation gap.
Enormous. So it's a fascinating sphere to think about.
So for anybody who wants to translate English novels back into Afrikaans, I'm launching that kind of a program at the University of Stellenbosch, and I'm looking for brilliant PhD candidates. I have a candidate who's looking at 1 or 2 English novels translated back into Afrikaans, and there are very few of them. One is Michiel Heyns, is The Children's Day, translated as Verkeerdespreid.
Yeah.
And another one is Jane Coutier's Disgrace, translated by Fani Olivier as An Oneer. Very rare, but I think it's a particularly interesting cultural move to translate out of English and back into South African indigenous language.
You know, can I just finish off? I always look at the Dutch. The Dutch make it a matter of pride that every, well, what a statement, but more or less every good book which is published in the world gets translated into Dutch. And it's the Dutch government is behind it with massive funding. My Dutch translator works on me, he works on Antjie Krog, and he works on Oopdijk, as he says, Oopdijk, Updijk. And he's got a wonderful life. And he's subsidized. So each time, if someone watches me for the next book, it's him. Because he gets heavily subsidized. And he earns a lot of money from much more than writers would ever get, or original writers. So they are well cared for. It's a whole industry. And South Africa should really look at that, you know, and less helicopters and less submarines and stuff, and more towards, you know,
to those Afrikaans writers in the room, and I see one, Sonja Lutz, and I'm sure there are others hiding away here, and Phil de Precies, also here, also a very famous Afrikaans writer. Please don't switch to English. I want to read you in Afrikaans first. I want you to be the local part of global before you get global, the global part of global. And I would also like to translate you. And I think it's a tremendous loss to have that step through the original language or the indigenous language lost. Thank you. I wonder whether Michiel would like to mount a statement.
Mount a statement.
About his translation and
Right, well, thanks in the first place for those very kind words about the translation. Yes, it was hell. It was an extreme form of the problems one has with any translation, as you know. A translator has 2 contradictory jobs. One is to render the original text as faithfully as possible. The other one is to make that text accessible to a foreign audience. And obviously, as I say, those are contradictory, because take something like Etienne's 30 Nights in Amsterdam, wonderfully rooted in the native soil. But how do you convey that to someone who's never been to the Karoo, who doesn't understand that whole culture? And then, of course, as you have also been saying, Zan keeps on coming up, because her language is really an emanation not just of her body, but of that whole landscape of which she is a very strange offshoot. So you have to render that in a way that gives you a sense of the original, but is accessible to someone who's never been to the Karoo, doesn't know where Propernet is. I thought I'd give you some examples rather than talk in general. A couple of points. I mean, there was a very creative trialogue between Etienne, Isabel Dixon, our agent, and myself, while this translation was in progress. And there were some, I don't want to call them disagreements, but let's say there were some sort of differences. And this threw up some interesting points. Now, for instance, Zan, who loves a man in uniform, in fact she loves any man, but in uniform is better, whether it's a convict uniform or a military uniform. Anyway, she interesting, on several occasions refers to something called Seuns van die Wolke. Now you have to be of a certain generation to recognize the illusion. A novel by Leon de Kock about young men who fly. And it's a very high-minded novel, as these novels often are. And so when put into Zan's mouth, with her lascivious grin, it acquires a wonderfully ironic slant. She is going to find the Seuns van die Wolke. So there's that ironic tension between the allusion to the canonical work and Zan's use of it. So how do you translate Seuns van die Wolke? I decided on Biggles. It's contemporary with Etienne van Heerden. It is about, for those of you who haven't read Biggles, of a different generation, Captain W.E.W.A. Johns, yes. And it's also a very square-jawed, clean-living young man who has incredible adventures. I went and looked at Biggles, and it's quite interesting. I think there are about 60 Biggles novels, and the titles are sometimes quite interesting. Well, there's Biggles and Company, which is clear enough, but there's one called Biggles Takes It Hard. And there's one called Biggles Sees Too Much. I invented Biggles Gets It Up, but you know, this is just, okay, so I decided on Biggles. Here we have an example. Zan is in Pretoria. She is in disguise. She's disguised as a little old woman. And she decides enough of this. She wants to go and see the Seuns van die Wolke. I'll read you the Afrikaans and then the translation. Ek gaan julle opsoek, Seuns van die Wolke, julle bedverdreiers, julle pille oor die likkerskou gegooi. She has pills to keep epilepsy in control. Soos vlugsout en met 'n wens. Vandag is 'n kaalgat, net ek en Zan sonder boere bedrog. Pielevlegters, ek is op pad, ek het julle gesien op Johannesburgstasie. Please forgive my language, blame the author. So I translated this as, I'm going to pay you a visit, Biggles and Company. You Bedford bums, you. Chuck pulls over the left shoulder like spilt sand and wished a wish. Wished a wish. Today I'm bare-arsed, just me, Zan. Biggles, get it up, reach for the sky. Cockchafers, I'm on my way. I saw you on Johannesburg Station. Now, you know, some of the problems here. Okay, Bedford Reyers, okay, the army boys, they ride around in Bedfords. But when Zan uses a word like Reyers, you just know there is a sexual connotation. So I changed that to Bedford bum boys, you, because they all are sitting in Bedfords. And then, of course, with, I included Reach for the Sky, another allusion many of you may not get or may well get. It was Douglas Bader, another Flying Ace, another very high-minded book. And I thought it added, interestingly, to Zan's appropriation of the cultural goods. But of course, this is now a shift to a different cultural goods. Etienne gave me the wonderful excuse that Henky's mother is English-speaking. He's often referred to as Enid Blyton in the novel. And she makes her, or she allows her son, encourages her son to read English books. So I had that to refer to. And it immensely expanded, I think, the cultural possibilities of the novel. It's what Leon was saying, we lose a lot, but we may gain something. Well, I gain Biggles, that is to gain. And again, Zan then does go to this military camp, and indeed there they are, the Seuns van die Wolke. And Zan van Somersetstraat van huis uit, ek staan daar by die tent is 'n flapper, verskyn die lywe manne, die marcheerders, die kanonvloer in die vleur van hom. Hulle roep na mekaar en staar, een en almal. Ek staan daar voor honderde Seuns van die Wolke in my kort rok, my lippe rooi, my hart op my mou, die fluite van 100 nee, 1000 monde loei om my, ek voel deur die ore genaai.